Plants are the backbone of global food security, but out of thousands of plant species, we rely on only 9 for 60% of our food. And considering that 80% of foods are plant-based, plant genetic resources for food and agriculture are critically important for the desired transformation of agri-food systems. Plant genetic resources are found in the wild, maintained on-farm, conserved in gene banks, and planted in research fields. They are critical for developing crops that are nutritious and resilient to pests, diseases, and extreme weather conditions. 6,000 plant species, both wild and cultivated, were surveyed in FAO's Global Assessment, the third report on the state of the world's plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. These species are an invaluable resource to diversify and strengthen global agri-food systems. Traditional crops and varieties cultivated and maintained on farm are often safeguarded by local communities. Gene banks, where plant genetic resources are conserved outside their natural habitat, play a crucial role in making these resources available for research and development. Since 2012, global gene bank collections have grown by 8%, reflecting the importance of ex situ conservation over time. However, many countries still lack systems to monitor or manage plant diversity, especially on farms and in natural ecosystems. FAO's global report notes progress in plant breeding, seed access, and promoting underutilized crops, but highlights that more investment is needed to scale up technologies and ensure access for all. To protect the future of food, we must conserve and use our plant diversity wisely. And with the right tools and policies, we can build more resilient, sustainable agri-food systems for everyone.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, esteemed panelists here in the hall, a very good afternoon to you, and a very warm welcome to our viewers joining us remotely today. Welcome to today's panel discussion on plant genetic diversity, the essential role this diversity plays for farmers, for consumers, and ultimately global food and nutrition security. We will also talk about the significant threats plant diversity faces, particularly in Africa, and about the ways and means to cope with these threats. Plant genetic diversity is the biological foundation of resilient, productive, and sustainable agriculture systems. Yet despite its fundamental importance, this diversity is under increasing pressure worldwide from genetic erosion, land use change, climate variability, market homogenization, and also conflict. Now, as highlighted in the video we just watched, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations recently published the third report on the state of the world's plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. Prepared under the guidance of the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, the report provides a comprehensive global assessment of progress made in the conservation and sustainable use of these resources. It also identifies persistent gaps, emergent challenges, and priority areas for action. So today we are launching the third report at this meeting, co-hosted by FAO and the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry here in Nairobi, Kenya. My name is Dan Liskeen. I serve with the Secretariat of the FAO Commission on Genetic Resources, and I have the privilege of moderating today's one-hour discussion. We are joined by a distinguished panel of high-level experts and policymakers from different sectors and regions, and I will introduce our experts as we proceed. Together we will reflect on some of the key messages of the third report and perhaps more importantly, explore what concrete measures are needed to improve both conservation and sustainable use. The objective is obviously to move beyond assessment towards implementation, towards practical, coordinated, and forward-looking action to better conserve and better use plant genetic resources to the benefit of farmers and consumers. Now, before we move into discussions, And into the discussion of actions and solutions, let me invite my colleague, Chika Mba, to highlight some of the key findings of the third report, especially with regard to Africa. Chika is the Deputy Director of the Plant Production and Protection Division at the headquarters of the Food and Agriculture Organization. He previously led FAO's Seeds and Plant Genetic Resources team and has extensive experience in crop improvement and genetic resource management. So Chika, please give us an overview of the state of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture in Africa. Thank you, Chika.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Dan, for that introduction. Your Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues, if I may stand on protocol that have been already observed. The third report on the state of the world's plant genetic resources for food and agriculture has about almost 400 pages. I checked 374. So I think it would be too much to expect that everyone will be able to read this report page by page for themselves. Colleagues did an excellent job in summarizing this report into a 28-page in brief. I encourage everyone to download copies of both the full report and the in brief. Is gratis online, and read. Earlier in the morning today, my dear friend and colleague Noel made a seminar presentation on the findings on the third report, on the findings of the third report. As she spoke, I tried to take down some points that apply specifically to Africa. And as Dan has requested, let me share some of these with you. I will start by underscoring that the third report was actually prepared following the template of the second Global Plan of Action for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. So the points that I will provide to you now will also follow the structure of the second Global Plan of Action for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture that we refer to as the second GPA. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a summative statement of the third report as it pertains to Africa is that genetic diversity of our crops is at risk. I repeat, genetic diversity of crops is at risk in the Africa region. And why do we come up, or why has the report come up with this conclusion? Over 70% of crop wild relatives and wild food plants, plants that are not yet domesticated, that we harvest for food, they were found to be threatened. And why this is even more worrisome so is that this percentage, this 70%, is double the global average. So Africa is leading the way in our crops, wild relatives, and wild food plants being threatened in their natural habitats. About 16% of the 12,000 land races and farmers varieties that were inventoried in 19 countries that contributed to this report were found to be threatened. And we should be concerned about this because These farmers' varieties and land races are of crops that are important for our food security and nutrition, such as rice, yam, sorghum, and millet, and also cotton, an important cash crop. Moving on to the conservation of plant genetic resources in gene banks. It is noteworthy that about over 200,000 accessions from almost 4,000 species are conserved in 56 gene banks across Africa. And farmers' varieties and land races account for 87% of all these gene bank accessions that are conserved in gene banks. So, but something that is of import is that gene banks in the region conserve only 14% of those crop-wide relatives and only 7% of wild food plants that have been collected in the region. So we know that climate change is threatening the natural habitats of these important resources, yet only 14% of the crop-wide relatives, which are the repositories of the hereditary traits for breeding progressively superior crop varieties, are being managed in gene banks. And to also underscore the urgency of more concerted action, only 10% of all these ex situ collections are safety duplicated. So safety duplication means that an accession is stored outside of just one gene bank. It could be in the so-called black box method, but the important thing is that the accession is stored in a way that it can be regenerated in more than one gene bank. And also underscoring the weaknesses in the system, many of these accessions are not being regenerated, meaning that even though we count these 220,000 thereabout, we do not know for a certain that all of these samples are still viable. Regarding sustainable use, especially the use of these gene bank accessions in plant breeding, 14 countries reported that 44% of their germplasm accessions have been characterized. So we know the data on 44% of these germplasm accession. What about the 56% that have not been characterized? How would plant breeders and scientists know which ones contain the traits that can be used for the further improvement of these crops? And again, of note for the region is that while some countries have reported that they now use molecular biology, molecular genetic tools that are efficiency enhancing in characterizing their germplasm, it is far from being the norm. Of course, there are many reasons, funding, capacity, and so on and so forth. Plant breeding is ongoing in many national programs. 21 countries reported that active plant breeding programs are on for 81 different crop species. 13 underutilized crop species were reported as being prioritized for commercialization, including those that are endemic to the region, such as eggplants and some other species that were introduced, such as mango, moringa, amaranth, and sponge gourd. some of the key challenges in human and institutional capacities captured in this report include the fact that many countries do not have national strategies for managing plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. So if the strategies do not even exist, what provides the framework for action by the practitioners? There is poor documentation for in situ, for on-farm, and in general, weak information systems. There is an underinvestment in human resources, in infrastructure, in the novel technologies that are needed for managing plant genetic resources in the 21st century. Another constraint is with education. Virtually no postgraduate programs that are available, and then there are persistent shortages in skills. And with this, Dan?
Thank you, Chika. I think that was a very comprehensive summary of the key findings of the State of the World report with specific focus on Africa. Now, one of the findings of the third report is that there is limited long-term funding for plant breeding available, in particular plant breeding for plants living for several years, the so-called perennial plant. And this gives me an opportunity to introduce Regina Mbuga. She is a farmer from Kenya, and she cultivates avocados using seedlings developed by the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology here in Nairobi. And I had the opportunity to speak with her before this discussion, and she shared that pests pose a significant challenge to avocado cultivation in Kenya. Regina, could you please tell our audience, both here in the hall but also joining us remotely, about your work and the challenges you are currently facing?
Okay, thank you, Sir Dan. I am Regina Bogwa, distinguished guests and gentlemen and ladies. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Yeah, I thank the E-Club organization for inviting me here to highlight simple things about avocado farming and also some food crops farming background there practically. So I'm a small-scale farmer, and in my farm I grow different crops which were used to be grown long time ago by our ancestors. I grow things like maize, bananas, cassava, arrowroots, beans, potatoes, and also pawpaws, and also other fruits. Before I talk about avocado, those indigenous food crops, they were grown by our forefathers. They were very helpful to families in the communities. There were good resources of enough food for the families. They could grow them in plenty, and also they had the best hybrid quality of the seeds. They could grow a small portion of the farm and harvest a lot of them, enough for their families. But nowadays you find that the yield of the seeds that we are growing there in the communities is not giving farmers enough yield after planting. This is because of climatical changes and also diseases. But long time ago, our forefathers, they used to use traditional methods of controlling the pests, and also they could use things like ash to spray on the harvested maize, and also soil. When the seedlings were young, they could put soil to prevent the caterpillars, which used to spoil the seedling when growing, or the plant, the small plant when it was growing. But today, this is not done because of the soil have been spoiled by the chemicals which are being sprayed today. So the yield for today's of the farmers is becoming low and low, and also the nutritive value. In those long days, the food that was grown, the maize and the cassava and the yams and the arrowroots, they were much helpful to the families because they grew organically. The farmers did not use any fertilizer at that time or any chemicals to control the pests. They used their own traditional ways of controlling the pests and also the diseases. But now there is a challenge, and you find that they are using chemicals which are not giving good value and also quality to the production of the plants. And also emerging diseases, they are there. Like in maize, we had Kwale, which is Kikuyu, the disease that was there. It used to attack the maize. But the farmers, they knew how to deal with it traditionally. But nowadays, the climatical change, they have affected the climate and they are not controllable. So we find that the production now is getting low, and the families, some families are suffering. They are not getting enough food. Instead of getting 3 meals per day, maybe they are taking 1 meal or 2, which is not giving them good health. And that is why you find that we have very weak people who today they cannot do those manual jobs because of their weakness of the body and also poor health. So we as farmers, we have those challenges, and also we need to improve the maybe planting ways in agriculture. So I would plead to the Kenyan government to have ways of maintaining those old genetic seeds, which are now not easy to get them because they have the raw production of food have gone down. Now I come to the second point about avocado. I am a scale avocado farmer, and to start with, I have years experience of growing avocado. My farm is, our farm with my partner is not very big. We have around 2 acres where we grow those different crops and avocado trees. About 4 years back, or 6, we started the avocado farming, and we got our seedlings from Karo, that is institutions from university like JKUAT, that is Jomo Kenyatta University. They have got seed beds for avocado seeds. Some have are grafted, others are not grafted. So we bought those grafted ones, and we started growing the avocado seedlings. And there are 3 types. There is hash, and then there is fuerte, and also there is local type. But in my farm, we have grown hash and fuerte. And our aim was to get enough food. Avocados are very good in nutrition. They cater for many things in our bodies, good health, good skin, and also they prevent some diseases. So that is why we engaged ourselves in growing of avocado. And also another reason for them, it is for commercial benefits. Because we realized from eCraft and from Kenyan agricultural institutions, we were advised that we can sell the products to some companies who will pay very well. So we started growing avocados, and now we have about 80 to 100 trees, which we started with. But because of emerging diseases and climatical changes, there are those, the products not doing well, and the avocado trees of recent, they are being attacked by diseases like mite disease, which attack the leaves. The leaves fall down, and the tree remain dry, whereby it cannot produce good and quality fruits. So that is one challenge that we are facing. The other one is about root rot. It affects the roots of the trees, And also, it brings down the yields of the production. And also, we have fungal diseases. They also attack the stem or the trunk of the plant. And these fungal, they don't help the plant to grow well. So those are the challenges that we are facing when we are growing avocados. But the erythro we have, it helps us in home use. And if we have a surplus, we sell to the AFMAC company or group. They came and approached the farmers there to be their customers so that they may sell the farmers may sell their product to this group or to this cooperative. So many farmers there, they have grown avocados and they are selling to this group or to this company. And the first time they sold to the group and to the organization, but they were paid well. And so they were encouraged to grow more trees, and more farmers joined the company, the cooperative, and now we have around 600 members in my area, in the zone I am in. And they are very interested in avocado, and they could be happy if they know how to control those diseases and the pests.
Thank you. Thank you, Regina. Sorry to interrupt you, but we have limited time. We have only 25 minutes, I've just been told. So therefore, can I interrupt you here? I think it's a very interesting example. Of course, it's an example of a high-value, mainly export crop that faces serious challenges in Kenya, but also in other countries, including heat and drought and also various diseases and pests. Now, what role can genetic resources, plant genetic resources, play to address these constraints? And I thank you also very much for that very comprehensive picture you drew of your farm and your activities. But it's now my pleasure to introduce Eliane Ubalijoro, the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, C4ICRAF, our host today, in fact, which is part of the CGIAR, a global research partnership of agricultural research institutions. Eliane spearheads groundbreaking research and innovation to tackle environmental changes, climate resilience, and food security worldwide. She bridges science, policy, and sustainability. So just what we need for our discussion today. Eliane, thank you for joining us. What role play genetic resources and what role plays your institution to address the kind of challenges Regina just told us about, like pests and diseases, climate change, etc.?
So first of all, I just want to say it's really important to have Regina's voice on this panel, and I really appreciate that this panel was organized to highlight farmers' voices. It's really critical. We know that Africa is one of the world's richest regions for plant genetic diversity, yet the report is showing that, much of this diversity, especially trees, wild food plants, and underutilized crops, is poorly conserved and increasingly at risk. We know we need to better serve farmers like Regina, and this is what is really important in terms of the gaps that are highlighted. We know that the losses are accelerating due to deforestation, land use change, climate stress, and underinvestment in seed systems and gene banks. At C4ICRAF, we're helping address these gaps through our gene bank and the leadership we have with the African Orphan Crop Consortium and close collaboration with national governments and research institutions. And this is where it's so important to hear from farmers to ensure that the work we do is serving them. And so what we see is that how we focus on the neglected areas by conserving seed and planting material from indigenous African fruit, nut, and multi-purpose tree species, many of which are missing from conventional crop-focused gene banks. These species contribute directly to nutrition, income, fuel, fodder, and ecosystem services, and are increasingly important for climate-resilient farming and landscape restoration. From the conservation side, what we know is that it's really critical for us to be working through these consortiums we're involved in to focus on improving crops that are central to African diets that have historically received little research investment. This work is supported by the enabling role that FAO, whose global frameworks and data systems and policy guidance on plant genetic resources and underutilized crops help create the conditions for national research, seed system development, and crop improvement efforts. Together, these efforts contribute to diversifying diets and improving micronutrient intake and reducing reliance on a narrow set of global staples. What we also know is the work we do at the interface of regenerative agricultural ecological systems is really on how do we look at ways that we can naturally improve resistance to diseases and improve the health of the landscapes to reduce the diseases that are faced by farmers like Regina. And this is where our field gene banks are really critical because they help us conserve living collections of fruit trees and other perennial species that cannot be easily stored as seed. It also makes planting material available for research, landscape restoration, and farmer use, like Regina mentioned in terms of the partnerships she mentioned that provided the seeds necessary. So we really see that focusing on trees, wild food plants, and underutilized crops complements what national gene banks are doing and helps us really bridge the critical gaps that are identified in the report, ensuring Africa's plant diversity is not only conserved, but actively used to build resilient food systems, and more importantly, serve farmers like Regina to ensure that we're looking at the issues that are being faced, and we look at how do we increase the productivity of farmers, how do we find more regenerative ways of improving soil health so the types of soil diseases that are affecting the roots don't happen, how do we look at intercropping systems where push-pull systems are helping improve the health of the landscapes and the food systems that are allowing us not only to produce food, but to ensure that farmers are not growing themselves poor, but are growing themselves rich, while being the stewards of not only the biodiversity that we so need to conserve, but the food systems that we all depend on.
Thank you, Eliane, also for being brief. A very comprehensive picture going, in fact, beyond plant genetic resources. It's the whole agricultural food system which we have to keep in mind. So plant genetic resources play a role, but they do not play the only role. Now, as we just heard from Regina, the problems with avocado, I mentioned that avocado in Africa is still an export-oriented crop, obviously, that, however, helps farmers to generate income and is therefore very important. But there are other crops that attract less interest by, in particular, the private sector, less investment. And I would now like to introduce Rebi Harawa. She serves as the Global Research Program Director for Africa at the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, widely known as ICRISAT. The institute is a global leader in innovation for a tropical dryland agri-food system and is part of the CGIAR. Rebi, maybe you could explain to our audience how ICRISAT conserves and utilizes plant genetic resources in support of its research and breeding programs, and turning to some of our key crops, despite the strong climate resilience and nutritional value of crops such as millet. Why is there, in your opinion, a lack of breeding support and investment in this field and for these specific crops, for example, millet?
Yeah. Thank you very much, and it's really a great honor for me to be here at the launch of this very important report on plant genetic resources. As ICRISAT, we are focusing on the transformation of agri-food system in dryland agroecologies, and so one of the very important elements is the crops that are more resilient in these dryland agroecologies. And so our starting point is to conserve the genetic resources that are used for the breeding or improving the crops that are more adaptable to these. For example, you said about millets, sorghum, but we also have grain legumes like pigeon peas. And the crops that I've mentioned, I think we are hearing so many things around. These are orphan crops, neglected crops. But if you look at the dryland agroecologies, like in Africa, we are looking at 40% of the land being dryland. In Kenya here, it's about 86% arid and semi-arid. These areas are home to 60% of the population. And so it's very important that we make sure that they have actually food that can sustain this population. So as ICRISAT, we have a very deliberate role of conserving these genetic resources. We hold the largest gene bank of these crops, 129 germplasm that we conserve in various places. We have our gene bank in India. We also have our regional gene banks in Zimbabwe, as well as in Niger. Very important to mention that these genetic materials, they provide the basis for our crop improvement program. These crops, inherently, they are very nutritious, but they are also more adaptable to this environment because of their resilience to climate change. But also, I have to mention that these are the crops, if you look in terms of the Africa food production. Before we had maize, for example, we had these crops. But today, like I said, they are called traditional crops. They are called orphan crops. Now, the most important thing that we need to look at is the conservation aspects. We need to provide enough resources to make sure that the crops that we have, we can actually utilize them. And today, the challenge that we are really facing, one, in this conservation, we have the African materials that are well underrepresented. The largest conservation that I've mentioned, only a few are coming from Africa. The other challenge that we have gaps in the technological gaps for the management of these gene banks. As we said that having a gene bank, it should not be a museum. A gene bank should be a place where we can use the materials for harnessing or improving the genetic makeup for addressing issues of yield, addressing issues of disease or pest and disease resistance. But also, as we said, we also need to make sure that we are consistently looking at how to increase adaptability of these crops to climate change. Right. Today, we are talking of extreme heat. We are facing a lot of challenges in the sense that there are little resources that are going into programs for these, what they are calling orphan crops. Today, I think we have to live and start calling them opportunity crops. I think some people have actually agreed that these are opportunity crops because they bring diversity to our food, to our diets. The other challenge that we are again facing is when we start doing the breeding, we need to bring communities like our farmer today. They have to be involved in the participatory evaluation of these crops because we want to give them the crops that are going to fit their cropping system, their preferences, but also even their dietary requirements. And so we need farmers to be part of this system. And oftentimes we find that because of limited resources, most of the research is happening at the upstream research station. But we need to take this research to where we are working with these farmers. More importantly, when it comes to sustainable use, we need to develop sustainable seed systems. This is one of the missing elements. ICRISAT, we have done our best to develop what we call community seed systems, where we have these seed banks working together with the communities, but we are not doing well enough, particularly across Africa. So we want to see even government, private sector to actually engage in the development of the seed systems for these neglected crops. The other element that I want to emphasize is the awareness, even of the importance of these crops. Like I said, there is limited awareness to say why do we need to conserve these crops. As a result, you find that when decisions are made, even for the policy, at the policy level, the investments, they normally focus on the well-known crops and leave out these other crops. And so we need to increase awareness at the policy level, at the community level, so that when we are conserving, we are moving to conservation and at the same time also making investment to make sure that these crops are coming back to the communities for use. Yeah.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you very much. Again, I think your statement showed that the high value of plant genetic resources, but it also made very clear that conservation alone does not generate the value, utilization does. And utilization implies many aspects which you mentioned, among which are, for example, the involvement of the communities, the involvement of those who are actually supposed to use the final products. So as they say, use them or lose them, that is the key. Conservation is only part of this continuum, and it is important that genetic resources, plant genetic resources, are being used. Now, at this stage, let me introduce Justify Gautami Sharma. He's the head of the SADC Plant Genetic Resources Center, which is a regional gene bank serving the Southern African Development Community based in Lusaka, Zambia. Justify, thank you for joining us. The third report does indicate that globally some progress has been made in terms of conservation of plant genetic resources, in gene banks at least. Much less so, I guess, in terms of in situ conservation. Now, Chika mentioned those figures. Over 70% of crop wild relatives of wild food plant diversity were found threatened in Africa, or about 16% of the 12,000 land races and farmers' varieties inventoried were found threatened in 19 countries from sub-Saharan Africa. What are the causes of this situation? And what do you think, what in your opinion needs to be done to improve it from your point of view? And what does SPGRC, your center, already do in terms of trying to ameliorate this situation, the situation of conservation, in particular, in this case, of conservation in gene banks?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dan. You are right. I'm representing the Southern African Development Community, the Regional Gene Bank, on conservation of plant genetic resources. But like what has been said, we are also under serious threat of extinction, especially of those plant genetic resources that are conserved in situ. I'm going to focus mainly on the crop wild relatives, mainly because that category of plant genetic resources has been neglected a lot in many parts of the world, including the Southern African Development Community. The major reason is that there has always been a disjoint between what we call the climate experts or the natural resources conservation experts, who mainly focus on the national parks and other conservancies, and the agriculture specialists. So in many parts of our region, or in many countries in Southern Africa, we are realizing that there is a silo mentality, where those that are responsible for the areas where crop wild relatives are found are working alone and not working in partnership with those that are very much interested in crop wild relatives, that is the agriculture sector. In Southern Africa, we have seen that challenge, and we have come up with various initiatives that tries to bring together collaborative efforts between the environment people or the natural resources people and the agriculture people. And we've come up with some guidelines on how these different sectors can interact to promote the conservation of species such as crop wild relatives, which are most fondly found in the natural habitats. What we have done so far is the creation of regional networks for the joint conservation of crop wild relatives, especially in the national parks and game parks. And this has been done through the collaborative efforts of our communities in various other initiatives that include the Campfire and other locally embedded conservation initiatives. What is needed generally is to ensure that in whatever program, policy making programs that we do, we bring on board initiatives that promote conservation of plant genetic resources in situ, and a focus mainly on the conservation of crop wild relatives, which are very important. The importance has been emphasized by many other speakers here. They've talked about them being reservoirs of genes that are responsible for adaptation to climate change. We've talked of heat. We've talked about droughts. We've talked about flooding. We've also talked of the need for us to have resistance to new pests and diseases that are emerging as a result of climate change. That can never be overemphasized. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Justify. Also for making this point, how important it is that the environment and the agricultural sector join forces in the conservation of in situ conservation of crop wild relatives, which is a big issue, and I think a lot of countries, including countries from outside of Africa, can learn from your example. Now, I want to come to our last but not least speaker, Theophilus Muturi, who is the Managing Director of the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, KEPHIS. Thank you for joining us, Professor. Now, having heard all these statements, as you are a representative of a government, may I ask you what, in your opinion, should be the role of government or of policymakers with regard to the conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources? How can government contribute to an improved conservation and better use of plant genetic resources, in your opinion?
Thank you very much for the question. First, I wish to respond to what the farmer talked about, problem of pests and diseases. Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, we are responsible for ensuring that plants and plant products grown in Kenya should be free from pests and diseases. We are aware of the challenge of a new pest, the Pasea mites in avocado. We are working very hard to get varieties or natural predators which will be able to control that. I'll get in touch with you so that my inspectors can be able to come and assist you. Having said that, as government, we have the mandate and the responsibility of conserving our plant genetic resources because, as I said, this is the insurance we only have. Should there be disasters, may it be fire, floods, and so on, due to adverse weather and the like, we can only go back to our conserved plant genetic materials to be able to regenerate and come up with our varieties or even get new traits to be able to improve them. So it's the responsibility of government to establish gene banks, come up with proper infrastructure to be able to store those plant genetic resources. We also encourage farmers to be able to come up with seed systems or community seed banks where they can be able to store those varieties which are critical to them, which could be land races, farm-saved seeds, which are adapted to different agroecological zones. We know there's a tendency to go for monoculture on large scale and not to do the intercropping and so on, which acts as a barrier in case of